Hello, just practical information. We will start in 1 minute, so if you didn't have time to register that yet, you can just do it in the coffee break or in the breaks. So please get in so we can get started in 1 minute. Yes, it's now time to open the 10th Play the Game conference. So dear Alderman of the city of Eindhoven and dear Director General of Democracy of the Council of Europe and dear WADA President, dear speakers, dear guests, dear delegates, my name is Henrik Brandt. I'm the Director of the Danish Institute for Sports Studies and Play the Game, and in this capacity I have the honor on behalf of the whole staff of Play the Game and the Institute and the board to welcome you to this 10th edition of the Play the Game conference. And for the first time we are hosting it in the Netherlands. And yesterday when we arrived, and also today, we could enjoy the sight and the sound of dozens of field hockey and football matches right in front of the hotel. You could hear the sound of the sticks and the outcries of joy when the goal was scored. And I know it's a cliche, but let's not forget that this joy of sport and movement is what it's all about. So allow me to mark the opening of this conference by looking back 40 years to the time when I was a kid myself, about 10 years old, and I was practicing sport, and I believed everything I watched on the TV screen, of course, and I tend to remember the Olympics and the World Cups. Oh, I'm sorry for mentioning the World Cup, by the way, sorry to our hosts. From those days, I remember it very clearly since we had just gotten one of these modern color TVs. It was probably from a Philips factory that used to be located in this area. And one of the heroes of those days were the Cuban runner Alberto Juantorena, who won both the 400 meter and the 800 meter in the 1976 Olympics, and who set a world record in 1977, 40 years ago, of 1:43.4 in the 800 meter. 40 years after that record is long gone, but the time is still a world-class time. The present world record in the 800 meter is 1:40.91 by the Kenyan David Reedie, and that is an improvement of just about 2.5%. So Reedie would have beaten Juantorena with about 20 meters. And why do I mention this? Because we all know which kind of effort and investment it takes to improve a world record by just a little bit more than 2-3% over a period of 40 years. We are talking about investment in science, in training methods, technical innovation, sports facilities, equipment, new technologies, education, support structures. And sometimes, I have heard the rumors about it in previous Play the Game conferences, it may also take investment in some less ethical methods. And I came to think about the evolution of the 800 meter world record last week in Brussels when I attended a seminar in a new and very interesting network called the European Platform for Sport Innovation, EPSI. And during this conference there was a representative of the Nova Child Innovation Cluster in France who talked about the development in schools in a country where they had registered the average times of the school children in 800 meter dating 40 years back. And do you know what? In spite of all the investment in sporting performance and excellence, all the legacy from the large events, all the inspirations from the sporting heroes of then and now, the time of the school kids in the 800 meter in that country was 1 minute slower on average today than it was 40 years ago. 1 minute. So that means that the school kids of today would be almost 200 meters, half a lap behind me and my school friends when we were kids 40 years ago. Doesn't that sound a bit scary? And can we believe it? Well, if you think, of course, the situation is not as bad in all countries, but you could look into some scientific graphs of trends and tendencies on obesity and overweight over the last 40 years on a global scale, even in the Netherlands. And you can see how child and adult obesity and overweight has grown in an almost epidemic way all over the world since the days of Alberto Juan Terena. I wouldn't blame just sport for this decline in general physical ability. We're up against, of course, big societal change, but still, while society has invested enormous efforts in developing sport and by doing so achieved a lot of improvement at the top level, it becomes very clear that in many ways sport has also failed to deliver. And it leaves us with some tough questions to face and to put on the agenda for the coming days. So dear media people here today, dear researchers, dear sports representatives, dear representatives of national and international authorities and policymakers, where were you while this development happened? Where was organized sport? Was it too obsessed with money, mega events, political prestige and power? Did it forget to reform itself in order to better deliver on the challenges created by change in the society around us? That is a very tough question, I know it, and it's one of the good reasons why we are particularly happy to organize the 10th Play the Game conference in Eindhoven and in the Netherlands. Because what you have to offer here is, in my opinion, an ability, or at least a will to rethink. For example, in a city like Eindhoven, which has undergone such transformation during the last 40 years from an industrial city and the home of Philips to the present status as Brainport and the hub of knowledge, design and technology. It is probably not by accident that the European Platform for Sport Innovation, the seminar I attended last week in Brussels, was co-founded by one of our local partners here, René Weilens from the Sport and Technology Cluster here in Eindhoven. And on the same line, we find many of our other local partners from Sport Experience, one of the first accelerators for sport startups in Europe. They have introduced us to more than 40 sports and media-related companies and startups assembled in the fascinating Essex building, which is a hub for sport, media and marketing here in Eindhoven, and we will visit it on Tuesday evening. We have also been inspired over the years by the Danish Institute and the Knowledge Center for Sport in the Netherlands, and the Fontys Sports High School just over here, and other knowledge institutions in the Dutch sports environment. We have good partners from Arco Sports Media and the Sport and Strategy magazine, the NOC-NSF of the Netherlands, and not least the representatives of the city of Eindhoven and some of the innovative sport field labs they have here in the Genneper Park, which is just outside the hotel. And let us not forget the generous support to play the game from the Dutch Ministry of Health, Welfare and Sport, and many more. All in all, we know that, like any other country, Dutch sport will have its challenges, but there is a lot of innovative thinking going on, and we need that. From Play the Game and the Danish Institute for Sport Study, we are very much on the same page. We are on a kind of permanent mission to promote a more democratic, a more ethical, a more knowledge-based, a more inclusive, and a more open and innovation-friendly sports environment. In Denmark, where our organization has its origins, we do it through our Institute for Sport Studies, and in the rest of the world we do it through Play the Game. So that is how this conference found its home in the Netherlands. We like the mutual inspiration, the atmosphere and the forward thinking here. You will get a chance to experience it by yourself in excursions and activities in the next 2 evenings. We also liked the tendency of Dutch people to be quite blunt and go right to the core of the issues. Yes, we need to be respectful to each other, but let us get the issues and the opinions on the table. Let us discuss with each other in an open mind, and let us confront the issues. And through that, let us look for better solutions. There are, of course, all the hard issues like doping, corruption, match fixing, harassment, excessive mega events, crime in sport, political abuse of sport, and all the other hard topics that we will discuss during the coming days. But let us not forget the soft issues, the soft bellies of sport and of the world population. At the EPSIC conference I attended last week, we heard presentations from people from all over the various departments in the European Commission, and they were all talking about the potential of sport, not just the people from the department for youth, culture and education and sport, but also the growth, the regional development, the health, the social cohesion. They all see a huge potential in sport for delivering on all kinds of societal challenges. Society in many countries wants sports to deliver more than today in many areas. And you don't only hear that message when you go to Brussels, you also hear it if you read the International Charter of Physical Education, Physical Activity and Sport, and the Kazan Action Plan, which we are going to also discuss later this week. But unfortunately, you could argue that in spite of the good intentions and the many declarations over the years, many sports organizations have themselves been overtaken by half a lap over the 800 meter. They have been unable to, or maybe unwilling to reform themselves and to engage with their own stakeholders and the wider society. And that is also why at Play the Game we take so much focus on good governance in sport. Sport simply needs to be better run so the children of the future can also run better again. And sports must keep up with the societal and the technological change. So it's time to look for new methods. It's time to look for improved governance in sports organizations. It is time to embrace new innovations, not just in elite sport, but in the ways we deliver, practice, and develop sport. And it's time to encourage new forms of stakeholder engagement in the running of sport. And here we are in a city known for its take on disruption, on knowledge, technology, and rethinking. And we are looking, it's a good place to look for the answers for the future. If sports organizations are not able to reform themselves and to deliver a much better and more compelling product in the future, they will lose relevance to an extent that we probably cannot imagine yet. This is why we also call this conference Riding Waves of Change. We believe that if we combine our efforts here in Eindhoven and when we get back home to our daily work and our home countries, we have the potential to contribute to real and positive change in sport. So I would like to wish you all good luck with that mission. And once again, I would like to say welcome and thank you so much for being part of Play the Game 2017. Thank you. And before I give the floor to the representative of our local host, the Alderman of Urban Planning and Finances in Eindhoven, Mr. Wilbert Seuren, I would like to once again thank all our partners and sponsors for their generous support. We did not only receive support from our Dutch partners and friends, but also from the Council of Europe, the European Commission, and a wide range of other partners. And also, I would like to thank the Danish sports environment and also Danish and Norwegian media organizations because they maintained their support for our conference in spite of the circus having moved out of town and to the Netherlands this year. So thank you to everybody who supported us. And now I will give the floor to Wilbert Seuren, who is an Alderman for Urban Development, Planning and Finances, and also presently the Vice Mayor of the city of Eindhoven. So please take the floor.
Well, thank you, Mr. Brandt, especially on your kind words about Eindhoven. You almost made it impossible to add something new on that. So I have a lot of things in my speech which I can skip now. But it's I'm very proud, and the city of Eindhoven is very proud to welcome you here on this special occasion. I think when you deal with sports, and sport is in a way the mirror of society and the quality of society and the way we live with each other, then you are dealing this week with very, very important issues. When you can deal with these issues, you can also make sure that with the quality of sport and the way we live together is sustainable. And it's very important. So also in that way, I'm very proud that Eindhoven can host these activities. You said something about sport in Eindhoven. This is the neighborhood where it all happens. A lot of sports are here. A lot of innovations around sport are also in this neighborhood. I think you all experience them by acting here, talking together, and coming together here, but also to experience the sports. So that is, I think, the best way to meet with each other, talk with each other, not only talking, but also doing and acting together. Sport belongs to Eindhoven. On a population of more than 225,000 inhabitants, 70% act on sport at least once a week. They don't do that professionally, they do that, of course, recreational, but also on a high level. There are, I think, more than 70 sports to join in the city. And we have a very vibrant urban sports culture. You mentioned Fontes Sports University, just around the corner here. And we, in this way, provide for an excellent way to bring people together. And that's something we are very proud of as a municipality of Eindhoven. But I think it's fair to say that there's another side of Eindhoven that has led the organizations of Play the Game to pick this town. In a way, you mentioned that too. In our region, Brainport Eindhoven, we know how to ride the waves of change. We had to. In the 80s and 90s, 1/3 of the jobs were lost, especially due to the bankruptcy of DAF Trucks and the large reorganization of Philips. After our local meltdown, the city of Eindhoven had to reinvent itself. The turnaround started when public and private joined forces and started co-creating in openness and transparency. Nowadays, our Brainport region is renowned for its triple helix, in which governments, local institutes and companies work together for economic prosperity, especially related to technology and design. It's a concept that has helped this region thrive, but started out as an emergency measure. The Eindhoven way of collaboration has also led to a special sports and technology program and pioneering work in sports innovation. Coming days you will visit innovative parts of Eindhoven such as Strijp S and the urban scene and Genneper Parks and the high-tech campus. New technologies quickly change the sports landscape and they can be used for the good. But temptations lies ahead because world sports never is just a game. They are big business as well. Cooperation cannot prevent misuse of new technologies. Cooperation is also a difficult path that feels slow and inefficient. But we in Eindhoven believe that's the only possible path to create a world of sports that is, as we say, future-proof. During Play the Games, you will be exchanging visions on this topic. You literally crossed borders to share experiences, to explore all kinds of aspects of sport, good or bad, and to talk about the factors that can aid to success, failure, or improvement. I hope and strongly believe that our city offers you enough food for thought, enjoy playing the game, and you are very welcome here in Eindhoven. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alderman. And I will now give the floor to the architect behind it all, the founder of Play the Game. 20 years ago, it's a long time, but here he is, looking younger than ever, Sejer Andersen.
Silence, my ladies and gentlemen, silence. Well, I'm not calling on you to keep quiet, but I would like to try to summarize in one word what has been the biggest challenge for Play the Game to overcome when looking back on the past 20 years from this podium as we open our 10th conference. When, in May and June 1997, some colleagues and I spent endless hours forsaking the beautiful Danish spring nights inside a small and dark copy room at the offices of the Danish Gymnastics and Sports Associations, struggling with the telefax machine to get invitations through to Africa and the Far East via thin and always busy copper cables, we told ourselves two things. One, we would never do it again. Secondly, fortunately, it would not be necessary to do it again, Because once the problems we had put on the conference agenda came out in the public domain, they would soon be known by the whole world and be solved once and for all. It turned out it was not the most accurate prediction of the future. 20 years ago, we did not fully understand what we had in our hands, and we did not at all foresee what resistance we would face. Perhaps we still don't. And what did we have on the agenda then? What did the 109 people from 34 countries who attended here at this first international media arrangement ever dealing with the relations between sport, media, and society? Well, they heard a flamboyant British journalist by the name Andrew Jennings, who spoke about his journalistic travel against the stream that had led him to uncover widespread corruption and political abuse in the International Olympic Committee and the international sports federations. Allegations that at the time had earned Andrew Jennings a reputation as the devil's incarnation in Olympic circles and a 5-day suspended jail sentence in Lausanne. The delegates also heard one of the world's leading sports physiologists, the late Bengt Saltin, who cautiously asked if there could be a connection between the facts that on one side, blood values of Nordic skiers were on a dramatic rise, inexplicably, and young cyclists were dying of massive blood clots in their heart. And on the other side, the emergence of a new drug called EPO. Was this a sign of widespread drug use among endurance athletes? Could that be? Other issues were homophobia in sport, the privatization of broadcasting rights, and most especially, the crisis in sports journalism, described by Andrew Jennings as, quote, almost criminally bad standards of reporting, laziness, reluctance to ask questions, reliance on press releases, unquote. After our event, the stories on corruption, doping, etc., and the need to strengthen local associations were reported by some media in a few countries. And then nothing happened. Again, silence. Well, almost 1 year later, we published this book in Danish and English, repeating the stories. I think we sold 3 or 4 copies. I still have a few stock at home if you're interested. We should perhaps have waited 3 or 4 months more publishing the book, because in the second half of 1998, the sports world exploded with the police action in Tour de France revealing systemic doping, and with whistleblowers and journalists reporting on how Salt Lake City got to host the Winter Olympics thanks to private favors and outright corruption with taxpayers' money. This combined crisis led to important reform at the IOC and helped create the World Anti-Doping Agency, and then a new century would start when silence in sport would finally be broken. We thought. But no. FIFA corruption was reported at every Play the Game conference from the year 2000 and on by Jennings, Thomas Kistner, Jens Weinreich. Nothing happened. Not even when the Swiss courts in 2008 documented corruption worth $100 million did it make headlines worldwide. In 2005, Declan Hill was the first to strike the alarm bells over how match fixing had destroyed leagues in the Far East, but thanks to the internet, it was now a deadly threat to world sport as we knew it. For the next 5 or 6 years, the sports movement, with a few honorable exceptions like UEFA, spent more time denying the problem than finding solutions. The Italian self-taught doping detective Sandro Donati told his life story on how he had caused the downfall of high-ranking national leaders because of their active promotion of doping in elite sport, paid with taxpayers' money for anti-doping. Donati then found himself persona non grata in the sports family, whereas the responsible officials and doping doctors kept their positions in the highest rank of the IOC. One is today representing the IOC in the prestigious position as observer to United Nations. Mario Goichman, a hard-headed volleyball leader, in 2005 revealed the grotesque character of corruption in the FIVB, the International Volleyball Federation, and succeeded in undermining its flamboyant Mexican president, Ruben Acosta. However, Kochman also undermined his own fortunes and psychological well-being, and he now lives in misery in the outskirts of Buenos Aires. These and many other courageous individuals documented a series of failures in international sport, but the typical answer from the sports was either attacks on the credibility of the individuals or, most often, silence. So, in the first decade of this century, it seemed that Play the Game would remain a home for the homeless questions in sport. Dear Alderman, dear Director General of Democracy, dear WADA President, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends, today we claim we are riding the waves of change. Because, as you will understand it from this journey back in time, many things have changed in recent years, since 2010 to be exact. First of all, the many questions that were regarded as taboo just 10 years ago are now all over the international agenda. Doping, corruption, match-fixing, overspending, discrimination, sexual abuse, lack of access to sport for all citizens, all these issues and many more are recognized by almost 200 member states of UNESCO in a revised Charter on Physical Activity and Sport and in the Kazan Action Plan that will be discussed here on Wednesday. In that sense, silence has been broken. We are very grateful that thanks to earmarked support from the European Commission, the Council of Europe, and the Danish Parliament, we are able to host more than 30 government representatives from Europe and beyond. We hope that the more than 220 presentations you will hear over the coming days will inspire your future sport policy making, because it is the future that is our concern over the next days. Thanks to a generous grant from the Dutch government and support from the City Council, we have been able to choose Eindhoven as the host city. Here I have some paragraphs about the wonders of Eindhoven, but I think you have heard it twice, so I will save you that, but say we will have great chance to experience the vivid and very vital innovation culture of Eindhoven over the next days and evenings. Change is coming at us, whether we invite it or not. One of Play the Game's own contributions to inspiring change is the Sports Governance Observer tool, which we used 2 years ago to identify quite troubling standards of governance in the 35 international Olympic federations. In cooperation now with academic researchers and sports organizations from 9 European countries and Brazil, and with Erasmus Plus support for the EU part of the project, we have now expanded the focus to cover national sports federations under the obvious title, National Sports Governance Observer. We have found encouragement in the fact that national federations in Europe on average are in better shape than their international counterparts, although there is still a very generous room for improvement. You can hear the researchers present their results this evening. It has been equally encouraging that the national federations seem to be quite interested in improving their governance more than we experienced at the international level. They have been cooperative, curious, and willing to learn. The international federations still seem to resist change until they are put under so much public pressure that they have to give in. Ladies and gentlemen, there are groups of people in the sports environment who seem willing to resist change at any cost, especially if the cost is paid by others. For many years, we have argued that even if the Olympic network of organizations had similarities with the mafia, it was at least a mafia without the killings. This interpretation is at great risk after disturbing incidents in the past few weeks. In a courtroom in Brooklyn, where the FIFA case has now started, a former Peruvian football president, Manuel Burga, allegedly made a slicing motion across his throat in a signal to one of the witnesses, not once, but twice. This was taken very seriously by the judge in a case that has already tightened security, and Burga has been placed under sharpened house arrest with no access to phone and computer. there has been less response to a recent statement by Leonid Chagachev, the honorary president of the Russian Olympic Committee. In a radio interview in Moscow, Chagachev proposed to execute Grigory Rodchenkov, the former Russian head of the Moscow anti-doping laboratory who has fled to the USA and spilled the beans over systemic cheating in the past. Rodchenkov just needs to be shot for untruth like Stalin would have done, Chagachev said. Chagachev is not a raving madman from the periphery of the Russian society. He's a former KGB officer. He has been the skiing teacher and close ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin. And he was instrumental in securing the 2014 Winter Olympics for Sochi. His words are to be taken seriously, especially in a country where two former high-ranking anti-doping officers died surprisingly in their 50s in February 2016. The former chair and the former executive director of WADA, Vyacheslav Sinev and Nikita Kamayev. Even the new WADA director, Yuri Ganus, has been so courageous to hint that these two potential witnesses did not die of natural causes. Quote, "It's clear that two people could not just die like this. I do not have any facts, and as a lawyer I can say that until the opposite is proven, I cannot say anything. I understand that there was a situation, and the entire anti-doping organization was disqualified, and in this regard, this is an extraordinary fact." Unquote. In such an atmosphere, an open, fact-based debate on doping becomes difficult, to say the least. It also adds a perspective to what Play the Game has experienced in our own little corner of the sports debate, when both the Russian sports minister and leading WADA officials first committed to taking part today and then backed out. We sincerely regret that we cannot welcome the Russian authorities because we have no doubt of their genuine interest in attending, and their presence would have added value and important angles to the debate. But we also understand that in the present political climate, there may be waves so powerful that you do not risk to ride them. What is really worrying is that the outspoken death threat has spurred for no response whatsoever from the international sports movement. The International Olympic Committee, guardians of human dignity and of a harmonious society, has reacted, as in too many cases before, with silence. Not a word from the IOC president, not a word from the administration, not a word from the newly elected president of the Ethics Committee, former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Don't they care? Do they support the tone? Or are they just as afraid of their personal security as any Russian whistleblower? We can only guess. But it is one of the worrying signs that political tensions in and around sport have reached a new and damaging level. And what about us here? Let us not be intimidated. Let us all continue to do our best to find the truth and share it. Let us engage in dialogue and debate across borders, sports disciplines and professions, also and especially when the debate is difficult. One person who will be later with us today does not shy away from the difficulty. He has for years been at the center of a very heated debate on Qatar's hosting of the FIFA World Cup. So I would like to thank Secretary General Hassan Al-Tawadi from the Supreme Committee on Delivery and Legacy for showing the courage to enter into an open exchange later today on all the issues that Qatar is facing. That's a commitment to international understanding that many international sport leaders could learn from. In spite of the many changes we have seen since 1997, the key challenge remains unchanged. We have to keep breaking the silence when we find it, wherever and whenever it blocks us from understanding reality and from finding solutions for a better life in sport and physical activity. Over the next 3.5 days, this task is in your hands. We are overwhelmed to see how many have wished to take part in this conference, and I would like to once again express our gratitude to the many public institutions and sports organizations who have given the financial support that enable us to be here. But our thanks, first of all, go to you, the almost 450 participants. You may not all have arrived, but we look forward to seeing you and hearing you embarking on a critical but also respectful exchange of facts, experiences, and opinions. Play the game is an old English proverb meaning play by the rules, play fair. We are all looking for little pieces that can help us complete our picture of the world. That little piece may very well be in the hands of whom you believe to be your opponent. So please enjoy and appreciate disagreement. Then there's a good chance we will not only ride the waves of change, but also together make the waves of change. Let us throw ourselves into the ocean of sport. Let us play the game. Thank you.
Thank you, Jens. And in the same tune of playing the game and investing in ethical and safe sport, I now have the honor to introduce the Director General of Democracy at the Council of Europe, Snežana Samardžić-Marković. She is in charge of the organization's promotion of democratic innovation, governance, participation, and diversity. Her responsibilities include policy areas such as education and youth, local democracy, cultural policies, election assistance, the protection of human dignity, gender equality, children's rights, the rights of minorities, the work against discrimination, democratic citizenship, and democratic responses to crisis situations. And Snežana Samardžić-Marković, she also held numerous positions in the Serbian government. Among them, she served as a Minister for Youth and Sports in 5 years until 2012. And she has been the President of the Fund for Young Talents, and she has also served as a member of the Foundation Board of WADA. So I leave the floor to you.
Thank you for this long introduction. Dear participants, dear colleagues, or I should say surfers, because we are all surfing the wind and waves. This conference, as you have heard, is about riding waves. And waves can be provoked by social, political, cultural, or technological change. And these waves, as we see, do affect sport as well, negatively or positively. And as you know, waves might be provoked by the wind, by earthquakes, or gravitational pull of sun and moon. The question I want to address today with you is how can sport benefit the wind, prepare for the earthquake, and take advantage of the tides? And the answer could be, or could appear, pretty simple, namely by investing in ethics and in safety. So let me start by sport and ethics. The rapid commercialization of sport over the last decades has largely outpaced the organizational development of sport and is providing, unfortunately, opportunities for criminals to exploit sport. Embezzlement, bribery, bidding processes accused of corruption, manipulation of competitions, doping, they are all criminal activities, tempting really to threaten sports integrity. And when unveiled, they also erode people's trust in the sport they love, as we've heard also in the beginning. And I'm worried they not only erode the citizens' trust into sport, but they erode citizens' trust into institutions, democratic institutions in our continent and their ability to deal with this. Then the waves might gradually create small and big cracks in the solid fundaments of the rule of law. And they can, of course, these small cracks and big cracks jeopardize the entire edifice. And then the Council of Europe envisions a continent built upon three important pillars, values, three values: human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Our work in the field of sport pursues this mission too. Our anti-doping convention and our convention against manipulation of sport competitions are strong legal instruments, strong currents moving in the right direction, I hope. Why? Well, 47 governments have agreed on the standards, on legal language, and common level of commitment. And I would say this is the true strength of these conventions, because, as we all know, 47 governments not always agree on everything. So I think it's strength when they agree and somehow codify certain efforts and certain standards. We are also privileged to work and support the efforts of global organizations such as WADA, UNESCO, and the IOC, and countries in other continents. Because our conventions, they are European, but they are not only for Europe. And I would say this convening power, ability to codify this political consensus of many stakeholders into legal norms is the strength of Council of Europe that should be put to the service of sport. The Council of Europe's Anti-Doping Convention, the first international legal treaty is a legally binding agreement in this area, and it's paved the way towards the creation of the World Anti-Doping Agency and the adoption of the UNESCO Convention. Today, we have a two-pronged strategy. One way is to enhancing monitoring of compliance by state parties and providing targeted assistance to those countries that want to improve their anti-doping policy and practice. For instance, we are running a project launched in May 2016 to enhance anti-doping policies in Russian Federation. And this is very important because we try to contribute to education of professionals in sport, but also legal professionals in Russia. We also facilitate the coordination of public authorities' position in the framework of WADA. Then the Maculan Convention on match fixing is already making a difference, we think, without even having entered into force yet. But I'm worried about the current deadlock that prevents EU member states from ratifying this convention. I trust that Malta's position will evolve and that the EU institutions will find a way so that we can soon have a very strong common front in the fight against corruption and fraud. And I'm convinced that it is in everyone's interest. Of course, good governance is the backbone of any institution and organization wishing to be credible, effective, and safe from corruption. Sports organizations are by no means excluded from the logic. Governments have expressed their wish to see good governance principles at work in the sport sector. Such is also the expectation of athletes, sport lovers, and citizens in general. More and more clubs and federations are introducing measures to improve transparency, participation, and accountability. And this evolution is not only very much needed, but is welcome. There is a momentum to be seized, and we admit that, but my message is too, we have to speed up. The Council of Europe contributes to this effort at different levels. At the political level, through the elaboration of a resolution on the promotion of good governance for adoption by the Conference of Ministers responsible for sport that will take place in October 2018. And also we do it through our participation in the International Partnership Against Corruption in Sport, with sport organizations and governments, to develop common benchmarks on good governance. We also do it, as I said, on political level, but on more practical level, we do this through the preparation of a handbook providing examples, ideas, and advice on national good governance practices and the setting up of a database on corruption cases in sport. And of course, we also support the Sport Governance Observer project of the Play the Game, to extend the benefits of this project to the other interested European countries. But I spoke a little bit about ethics. I should turn also to other important issues such as safety in sport. Protecting the rights of people in the context of sport is also part of Council of Europe mission. This includes making sport a safe environment for both adults and children when practicing sport or attending a match. The new Council of Europe Convention on an integrated safety, security, and service approach at football matches and other sports events has just entered into force. Through this convention, we look to guarantee the safety of thousands of people at a time. Let me give you an example. Safety, security, and service participants for UEFA Euro 2020 will certainly be a major challenge. This will be the first time that such an event takes place in 13 hosting cities from 12 countries across Europe. In other words, from Dublin to Baku. This obviously calls for stronger cooperation and communication among all concerned stakeholders. For this reason, at the Council of Europe, a working group on the preparation of UEFA Euro 2020 is already looking into how to address these key challenges. Accidents in major sport events are immediately visible, but unfortunately, there are other dramatic events in sport that are seldom or never reported. As Jens said, there is silence around them. There are many victims of violence in sport that will never be known, healed, or compensated. And I am speaking about sexual abuse of children at the hands of people they trust, such as their coaches, their sport leaders, or their peers. According to available estimates, around 1 in 5 children in Europe are victims of some form of sexual violence. The practice of sport is not, unfortunately, immune from this general risk. But we can work together to prevent it and to better respond to it when it occurs. I warmly welcome your decision to tackle this sensitive and important issue at this conference. The Council of Europe's Convention for the Protection of Children Against Sexual Exploitation and Sexual Abuse, so-called Lanzarote Convention, which now binds 42 countries in Europe, requires states to take very important measures to prevent and to respond to sexual abuse. They include, for instance, the screening of professionals working with children to make sure they have no criminal records of sexual offenses, or the setting up of a safe and accessible reporting mechanism so that victims or other people can report the abuse. Following many scandals unveiling serious sexual abuse in sport, EPAS, the Council of Europe Inclusive Platform for Cooperation between Public Authorities and Sports Organizations, decided in 2017 to address this issue through a joint project with the EU. On the basis of standards, training, and campaign tools produced by the Council of Europe on the protection of children in sport, we will very soon launch Start to Talk, an initiative aiming at empowering sport organizations as well as governmental authorities in the prevention and response to every kind of abuse, including sexual abuses in sport. Those who join the call will commit to take concrete steps to keep children and sport safe from abuse. And I trust you will join the call as well. So, dear participants, dear colleagues and friends, let me conclude by thanking Play the Game for bringing us together to discuss, in an open and friendly environment, issues that are far from simple. When facing all these waves, we may disagree on the approaches and on the speed, but we must always keep in mind our shared objective: persistently staying the course and making sure that disagreements do not lead and let us stranded. So many thanks for your attention, and I wish you really successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your initiatives and for your speech. At Play the Game, we are so fortunate to have a great network of researchers, journalists, academics with very high capacity. And I will now leave the role as chairman to one of them, one of our regulars, to Roger Pielke Jr., who is an American political scientist and professor and the director of the Sports Governance Center within the Department of Athletics at the Center for Science and Technology Policy Research at the University of Colorado, Boulder. So please, Roger, you will take over to run the next part of the session.
Good afternoon, or to my North American colleagues, good morning. Welcome. My job as moderator for the next two sessions, immediately before and after the break, is to help things run on time and also to facilitate your questions for our speakers. So as they're speaking, please do think about what questions you'd like to ask. We'll have some microphones. To keep things running on schedule, I'm going to give very short introductions. I'd encourage you to download the app, which is great and has a lot of information on each speaker. But it's a privilege and an honor to introduce Craig Reedie, who's the president of WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, and I can't think of a more timely speaker given what's going on in the sports world. The title of his talk is Fit for the Future. Craig.
Roger, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, or as they say in Scotland, good morning. Jens, I think I came to the second Play the Game conference, and I was warmly welcomed by Andrew Jennings, who then spent the rest of the evening attacking me and WADA in that order viciously. Jens, thank you very much for your warm welcome this morning, and I am happy to hear that things have changed between the second conference and the 10th meeting of Play the Games. Ladies and gentlemen, anybody who purports to talk about the future will inevitably have to speak first about the past. And the last 2 years have presented more challenges for WADA than faced by many equivalent organisations. The agency was founded as a reaction, as Jens said, to the Festina scandal in 1998, a crisis for doping in one sport, the sport of cycling. And since 1999, we have worked diligently to forge partnerships with governments, sport and other anti-doping doping stakeholders, harmonise sanctions, write, implement and revise the World Anti-Doping Code twice and its related international standards, develop the UNESCO Convention Against Doping in Sport that now covers over 99% of the world. We've carried out scientific research to the tune of $30 million US, undertaken the accreditation of 7 laboratories and the approval of 3, so that today we oversee 34 accredited laboratories worldwide, developed the athlete biological passport, funded social science research projects up to $3 million, and created top-notch educational programs, all on a very inadequate budget. But on 14th December 2014, our lives changed again when ARD showed its documentary, Doping Top Secret, How Russia Makes Its Winners, another crisis for doping in one sport, sport of athletics. On 1st of January 2015, we used our new powers of investigation under the revised World Anti-Doping Code to investigate the dramatic allegations revealed in the ARD programme. 11 months later, the Pound Commission reported and highlighted the widespread doping in Russian track and field athletics. WADA immediately suspended the Moscow laboratory, removed the director, declared the Russian anti-doping agency, RUSADA, to be non-compliant. The IAAF suspended the Russian Athletics Federation, and the Pound Commission referred to Interpol evidence of criminal behaviour involving senior elected officials in the IAAF and the extortion of substantial sums of money from athletes to avoid doping sanctions. It was this element of the situation that most concerned the world of sport, and cases continue with the French authorities. Then, on the 12th of May 2016, the New York Times, following a CBS television programme 60 Minutes, exposed further allegations of systemic doping in Russia. WADA instigated the McLaren Commission, Richard McLaren having been one of the 3 members of the previous Pound Commission. McLaren presented his first report on the 18th of July 2016, just a few weeks before the Rio Olympic and Paralympic Games, containing evidence of what he described as state-directed systematic doping around the Sochi Games and a wider system involving athletes, Russian officials within the Ministry of Sport and its infrastructure, RUSADA, the Centre of Sports Preparation of National Teams of Russia, the Moscow Laboratory, the Sochi Laboratory, and the Russian Federal Security Service. McLaren's initial report disclosed that this doping programme covered many sports in Russia over a period from 2011 to 2015. These revelations caused a media firestorm involving many in the sports community, at least the same number in the anti-doping community, and opinions offered by practically everybody on every aspect of the report. Sport had great difficulty in dealing with it, being released as it was so close to the Rio Games. Just after the Games, when stakeholder tension was at its peak, a cyber espionage group, the Fancy Bears, started releasing batches of confidential data from individual athletes regarding therapeutic use exemptions. This information came from one isolated Adams account opened for the Rio Games. Excuse me. The broader Adams, that's the anti-doping and administration and management system operated by WADA, was not compromised at any point, although substantial funds had to be allocated to ensure that it remained secure. The media firestorm continued. On 9th of December, McLaren published part 2 of his report, clearly indicating institutionalized manipulation of the anti-doping process across both summer and winter sports in Russia. Jens, you're a gentleman. Thank you. This report was accompanied by an evidentiary disclosure package website containing non-confidential evidence that many athletes in many sports may have been involved. The evidence in this report came from Dr. Rodchenkov, the former director of the Moscow laboratory who had left Russia and who was then and still is in the United States. All requests by McLaren to Russian authorities for additional evidence went unanswered. It should be remembered that McLaren's terms of reference were to identify the system, not to provide evidence on which anti-doping rule violations could be based. Work with the relevant international federations continues, and the McLaren report encouraged the IOC to reanalyze Russian samples from the Sochi Games, about 250 of them, and indicated that there was evidence of manipulation prompting IOC disciplinary proceedings against 28 Russian athletes who competed at Sochi. The report also helped the IOC to target its reanalysis program of samples retained from the 2008, 2010 and 2012 Olympic Games, resulting so far in sanctions against 39 Russian athletes. Now we wait the final work being undertaken by the Oswald and Schmidt commissions appointed by the IOC to investigate respectively the detailed cheating in Sochi and the institutionalized manipulation in Russia. In the post-Rio Games period, there were many accusations and comments on WADA and the anti-doping process and rules. Some even stated that both were broken and not fit for purpose. An opposing view might well be that the rules and processes worked well, as they dealt with a very serious example of cheating involving a major country. The latter half of 2016 saw summits of national anti-doping organizations, a WADA think tank, an Olympic summit, government sportsmen's meetings, a resolution passed by the Council of Europe, and very significant comment from athletes. And while conceding nothing, I am comfortable to re-examine WADA processes that have stood the test of time since 1999. No organization should be afraid to examine its systems to see if they could be improved. In November 2016, the Foundation Board reached a consensus on a series of recommendations designed to equip the agency with the tools it needs to fulfill its mission. The list of priorities is considerable and will present their own challenges to deliver. They include strengthening WADA's capability for investigations and an efficient whistleblower program, developing a strong WADA-led compliance program with appropriate sanctions and the creation of an international standard, increasing research-led anti-doping education, including an international standard, working with NADOs and regional anti-doping organizations and international federations to enhance anti-doping capacity, further developing the athlete biological passport, further development of scientific-based knowledge, for example, the prohibited list and prevalence issues, ensuring that the Adams system works technically and securely, increasing financial commitments and support from governments, sport and other means, and renewing our laboratory model and strengthening the laboratory accreditation process to ensure high-quality results and a high-performing anti-doping system. We are committed on laboratories to ensuring the quality of our 34 accredited laboratories, and this involves having a robust proficiency testing program in place. In 2016, 9 accredited laboratories were suspended, while in 2017, 3 more were suspended. A special working group was established and reported to our board only 10 days ago. In a complex situation, WADA needs to establish a more stringent external quality assessment scheme and to arrange more frequent site visits by independent experts and my science department. These efforts are necessary as the whole area of anti-doping science becomes ever more sophisticated, ever more complicated, and presents real challenges to the laboratories. We have created a similar working group to review WADA's governance model, specifically to examine the claims for independence of the anti-doping system from sports organisations and national governments. Representation on this working group comes from governments, the sports movement, national anti-doping organisations, athletes and other experts, all working under an independent chairman. They have been studying and continue to study the current governance model, in particular possible duplication of roles and functions of the Foundation Board and the Executive Committee, whether there is optimal diversity around their tables, whether they're too large or small, whether more athletes or more independent members, and so on. The group have held 2 full meetings and meet again in January. In the area of compliance, we have made real progress. This has resulted from completion of major efforts to have all stakeholders with rules that are in line with the World Anti-Doping Code. WADA is moving on from an emphasis on rule compliance to a similar emphasis on delivery of effective anti-doping systems and organisations on a worldwide basis. Athletes have been particularly vocal in favour of a WADA-led compliance system, and we are delivering this first by a new code compliance monitoring programme. Forgive me. In February of this year, we launched a code compliance questionnaire to federations and to national anti-doping organisations. Of 307 questionnaires sent out, we have received, would you believe, 306 completed. We cross-reference these responses with information that we hold in ADAMS and other means, and we have launched an audit programme that allows review of anti-doping programmes in even greater detail. The aim of all of this is to reinforce athlete and public confidence in anti-doping worldwide. It is the most thorough review that's ever taken place and will raise performance standards among the entire clean sport community. In addition, we have developed a graded sanctioning framework that specifies a range of graded, proportionate and predictable consequences for non-compliance by a signatory of the code. A robust stakeholder consultation exercise was conducted quickly and in 2 phases. And only 10 days ago, the Executive Committee agreed to the establishment of a new international standard for code compliance by signatories. And this standard will enter into force on the 1st of April 2018. This development is hugely significant, as it is a standard and part of the code that will therefore become applicable to every signatory, federations, NADOs, major event organisers. There are grades of non-compliance, critical, high priority, and other in descending order, of course. and in every case the intention is to assist signatories to become compliant within a set period of time. However, in the case of the most critical non-compliance with aggravating factors, the consequences of non-compliance, probably the inability to take part in competition, will be decided by an independent panel of arbitrators from the Court of Arbitration for Sport. So the WADA Executive Committee have, in a very short space of time, endorsed a WADA standard after rapid and full consultation with all interested parties, which was consistently demanded by the elite athletes of the world. We have also enlarged and strengthened our intelligence and investigations capability. The team has grown from 1 to 6 people. They operate independent of WADA management with an independent supervisor who audits their performance. We've also developed a network for investigations among anti-doping organisations and a new and successful whistleblower programme called Speak Up. The programme has received a significant number of contacts with whistleblowers, over 200 thus far, I am told, which are dealt with in the necessary confidential manner. The intelligence and investigations team are currently heavily involved with a series of investigations underway. However, these are temporarily on hold, as our resources are all allocated to verification of a database of evidence from the Moscow laboratory that may well corroborate the report by Richard McLaren. To bring the Russian situation up to date for you, the WADA Foundation Board on November last year, in November this year, maintained its decision on the non-compliance of the Russian anti-doping agency, RUSADA. The meeting did recognise the very great steps of improvement made by RUSADA. We have worked very closely with them to create a new supervisory board with a majority of independent members, an independent chairman, a new and competent director general, many new staff trained by 2 independent experts resident in Moscow, now with a team of 40 doping control officers, the right to undertake their own testing program in Russia, supervised by UK anti-doping, who conducted Russian testing during a period of about 18 months when RUSADA were not allowed to test, education programs for staff and, above all, the National Federation. And we have conducted a successful audit of RUSADA by WADA in early September. However, no progress has been made in the remaining 2 conditions in the roadmap, which was agreed months ago with the Russian authorities. And these are acceptance by responsible Russian authorities of the outcomes in the McLaren report, and secondly, the provision by Russian authorities to provide access to the stored samples and electronic data in the Moscow laboratory, which are currently sealed off due to a Russian federal investigation. Work continues on a regular basis to try to agree delivery and satisfaction of these 2 conditions. The Foundation Board meeting in Seoul 10 days ago also began the realistic challenge of funding WADA to undertake all the necessary additional responsibilities by agreeing almost unanimously an increase in government contributions of 8% for 2018, matched dollar for dollar by the IOC. As somebody who struggled as their treasurer for years to get 1%, getting 8% is a formidable effort. Much more will be required for the following 3 years, and the governments are starting to determine how they might deliver this. And this has to be done first by governments. It cannot be imposed by the World Anti-Doping Agency. But when governments get their figures right, they will be matched by the IOC. And in a final agreement for the future, a code revision team has been established to begin work on a revision of the World Anti-Doping Code to be finalised at the next World Conference in Katowice in Poland in November 2019. Perhaps predictably, some stakeholders think a complete code revision is necessary. But a more realistic view is that the current code works well and needs only minor alteration, resulting, for example, from the existence of a new compliance standard and a possible new education standard, as well as potentially including the relevant parts of a new Charter of Athletes' Rights currently being developed by our Athlete Committee. So, ladies and gentlemen, Fit for the Future is a convenient title for a speech delivered in late 2017. But the title clearly involves much research, much consultation, much work, and much agreement. All essentials, but challenges in the current anti-doping world. Thank you for your attention. Now, with a bit of luck, you've only got 2 minutes for questions.
Well, Jens has graciously granted us a bit more time. So less time for coffee, more time for questions, which seems a fair trade-off. Let me kick the questions off as you think of yours in the audience. Could you walk us through the options that Russia has before them for the Winter Olympics? How might this play out? I'm not asking for a prediction, but what are the different forks in the road coming up?
Well, actually, that's fairly easy. It would help if they would recognise the existence of the McLaren report, and secondly, give access to the Moscow laboratory, which are the two conditions that have been there for the last 18 months, and yet those are the two that we haven't met. Almost all the other operational conditions have been met. What else might happen?
What happens if they don't?
Well, if they don't, they remain non-compliant. That having been said, we will continue to assist the development of a good national anti-doping organisation in Moscow. Having come this far and getting them work properly, it would be crazy to stop that effort. If you're worried about protecting clean athletes, the best thing you can do is to have a robust and good anti-doping programme in Russia. So that's what we will do.
Does WADA have a position on whether Russian athletes or Russia as a country should participate?
The only comments that were held at the board meeting about 7 or 8 days ago was some comment about sympathy for the, quote, clean athlete, however that is described. It refers mainly at the moment to a very strong and hopefully well-organised pre-games testing task force which is working in the build-up to the Pyeongchang Games. We didn't take a position on anything.
So there's no position on how the IOC should act?
Situation is entirely different between now and when it was 3 weeks before the Rio Games. If anybody's worried about positions, I suggest that you wait for 10 days and then you might find out what happens from Lausanne.
One more from me. As many of you will know, in today's Mail on Sunday, Nick Harris, who's a frequent participant at Play the Game, not here this year, unfortunately, revealed some of the details of Gregory Rodchenkov's affidavit submitted to the Schmidt investigation. And in it, it has some pretty explosive allegations suggesting that the Russian Football Union has overseen systematic doping of the Russian soccer team. Your thoughts on that and how FIFA ought to respond to those allegations?
Actually, I bought a copy of the Mail on Sunday at the airport in Glasgow this morning, but the Scottish edition doesn't worry too much about FIFA and allegations which are obviously printed in the London edition. I was aware that something was going to be said. As far as we are concerned, we, WADA, are in touch with and dealing regularly with all international federations on the claims and points made by McLaren in his evidentiary website, and FIFA is one of these international federations. I think we wrote to them this week so they are aware of our concern. The only practical issue, I think, at the moment, as far as we're concerned for FIFA, is that as the Moscow laboratory is not accredited for the testing program, which I assume will be similar to the World Cup in Rio, their samples will have to go to an outside laboratory, presumably somewhere in Europe. But football or soccer can handle that because there's always a gap between matches. The problem in an Olympic Games is that the first round of the 100 metres is at 6 o'clock and the second round is at 8 o'clock.
You mentioned the new compliance standards, which, as I gather, come into effect the 1st of April 2018. Will those apply to Russia in the World Cup?
Sure. If they are code signatories, it will apply. You know, just think back, if we'd had that legislation 3 years ago, we wouldn't be in the trouble we're in now. There will be a straightforward description of how people become, if people are non-compliant, they can become compliant. You can become non-compliant with the World Anti-Doping Code by having 2 sentences in your rules, non-compliant. Well, that can be resolved pretty quickly, and it will be resolved quickly. So there are greys, but at the very top end, something that we have gone through over the last 2 years, the rules will say that we, WADA, have to make the case that they are non-compliant. If they accept it, then they will become compliant. If they do not, then there will be a case before the Court of Arbitration for Sport. So as far as the sports movement is concerned, they will be happy that as a federation they have these rules to apply themselves. As a major event organiser, somebody else will take these decisions for them and not the World Anti-Doping Agency. But we put in place the system, and that's really the one thing the athletes have wanted.
Yeah, and I should say the new compliance standards are really important, and they fill an existing gap in the code. But what happens on April 2nd if FIFA determines that the Russian Football Union or RUSADA or other elements of the Russian football infrastructure are not in compliance? Is it even conceivable that World Cup 2018 goes before an independent tribunal or CAS?
Well, it's FIFA are signatories to the World Anti-Doping Code. The standard will be there. It will be up to them, if people are non-compliant, to deal with it. I think the end result of that, and the time scales as such, it's unlikely to involve cancellation of the 2018 World Cup.
All right. So we have some roving microphones. Let's open it up to the crowd. Where's my microphone, people? Let's start over on this side.
My name is Anthony Hooper. I am an IAAF investigator into the Shobakova, Melnikov, Beliknichev, Papamasatadek, etc. saga, without in any way undervaluing the huge work that Hajo Sepelt did for the cause of doping. I'd like to hear your views on this proposition, that in fact it's the American prosecuting authorities in the case of FIFA and the French prosecuting judicial authorities in the case of the IAAF and now looking at the Rio Games, which seem to make so much more progress than any of us are able to do.
Well, they make very evident process when you see people being dragged out with sheets over their heads and put in the back of cars from the hotel in Zurich during a FIFA Congress. We as an anti-doping agency do not have the powers to do that. I suspect we may not have the inclination either, and maybe that's a criticism of us. But certainly very high-profile actions like that, that matter. The French issues, of course, came with respect from the World Anti-Doping Agency. They came in one way, as you know, so I know the name very well. We haven't met before, from me, and they came from from Dick's report. So we were in the Pound Commission case, we were a sports inquiry. We were not a criminal commission entitled to deal with breaches of criminal law somewhere.
Can I suggest to you what the big weakness is in WADA, IAAF, and other federations? And that is our inability to get access to documents. And I'll give you an example. In the Shobakova affair, there was a transfer of money from a company called Black Tidings to a Shobakova account in Moscow, which is well documented. I wrote to Singapore, I emailed Singapore, I telephoned Singapore and said, please may I have the bank statement showing the money coming out, because I suspected that the money coming in would show a link, for example, between Papa Musata Diak and what was happening. I have no power. They simply declined to do it using all kinds of paraphernalia. And what I suggest to WADA and to the IAAF and others is that you get member states over a long period of time to agree that Federation WADA investigators have the right to go to court in those countries and get hold of the documentation.
Well, thank you. I suspect it's easier said than done.
Of course it
This is a good time to remind folks we're going to have quick questions, quick interventions to move things along. Let's go to over on this side. All right. Hayo had his name dropped, so he gets to have the next question.
Hi, Craig. I would like to get your comment on Tiagashev's remarks a couple of days ago, the Russian NOC honorary president. The death threat thing, this is one thing. And the other thing is that if you read that very carefully, what he has said in his comment in the Russian media, he also said that he gives, to be honest and say it very clearly, he gives a shit on WADA, and WADA should be abolished, and they should have other ways to deal with the issue. WADA is not able to do that, and IOC either. So all these comments have been made by the Russian NOC honorary president just a few days ago. So the first question is, what is your take on that? And secondly, because IOC is failing to give any comment on the death threats of Mr. Tiagashev regarding Rodchenkov, what is WADA's take on that?
I think what the former president of the Russian Olympic Committee said is outrageous. It shouldn't have been made. As far as WADA is concerned, he's clearly out of date because Russia are signatories to the World Anti-Doping Code. He can say that we should be closed down any day he likes. That is entirely irrelevant. The very aggressive language he used, in my view, is entirely wrong, and I'm happy to say that now. And your second question was?
The other thing was that he also said that WADA is not the right body to work with doping and anti-doping issues and should be abolished.
Yeah, we've been criticised for many things, but I think I'm correct in saying he's the only person who said that we should be abolished.
All right. Other questions?
Coffee.
Right here. Oop. Wait. Raise your hand up high so she walked right by you.
Hello, my name is Aderun Kebilo. I'm from Nigeria. My question goes to us. What are you doing, looking at the fact that football is a very popular game in Africa, and nothing much has been done, or in terms of doping, as in getting the players playing in local leagues, tested and all of that. What do you think we can do to battle this in Africa? It's very silent and quiet where I came from. Thank you.
First of all, at the top end of sport in your country, when people reach elite level, maybe playing for the national team, they should be in the registered testing pool, and testing should be conducted. If you need assistance in that, we certainly will be looking at your compliance report that came to us to see what is being done and what people can do to help. I suspect you may be part of one of the regional anti-doping organisations, so I'll take your comment and pass it on. But there are certainly some countries in the world who find this much more difficult to do than others. Secondly, I think too that FIFA, as an international federation, should perhaps be rather more active in this field. They tend to restrict their anti-doping activity to what they do at a World Cup, or the Confederations Cup. So it's when competition is taking place. UEFA, I think, is a better organisation in Europe. Maybe we should be speaking to whatever the African Union for football is concerned. I'm sorry, I've got no instant responses. Perhaps a little bit of public education would be a good issue. Let's have some statement from yourself or from one of the football officials saying that it's time that this should be done. I mean, I know that in England there are somewhere around about 2,000 tests a year done on the Premier League players. Some of it is funded directly by the National Anti-Doping Organisation, and the rest is funded by football, and that's entirely the right thing to do.
Right here in the middle.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Oliver de Haan from the Netherlands Anti-Doping Organization. You started indeed by going to the future. You should also look at the past. And I think WADA is, you also stressed all the activities that WADA is doing right now to ensure a better future. That's good. But what is always a bit unclear to me still is when looking back in retrospect, do you think WADA could have acted sooner on the Russian problems with the several whistleblowers coming forward in the past?
Well, I've seen comments on that. I think the comments started about there was some evidence in 2010. I chaired the Finance and Administration Committee. I didn't know what a whistleblower was in 2010, so it's an easy cop-out to say I wasn't there. David Howman was the Director General and is speaking here at the conference, so maybe I'll word with David. But what I have done in response to that is I've gone back and looked at the connection we had with the whistleblowers from 2010 the whole way through. And the answer was in 2010 we had one telephone call and one email. Now, on that basis, I'm sorry, you can't take on what has clearly appeared to be a serious problem in Russia. And the contact developed to such an extent that eventually, if you're going to conduct investigations, and we didn't have proper legal power to do that until the 1st of January 2015. Second, you need evidence. So somebody has to produce evidence. So it's actually easy to say, why didn't you work and do anything in 2010? The answer was we didn't have power, we didn't have evidence, and quite honestly, we didn't have the right people and we didn't have any money. So in combination of all of these reasons, I'm happy to hear you say you think we're better now and we've got it right. But in 2010, it was a tough ask.
Over here on the right.
Mr. Reedie, two questions, both regarding Russia. The first one continuing the FIFA question. If FIFA wouldn't follow up on the McLaren report and on Rodchenko's allegations, which implicate, for instance, the whole national team from the 2014 World Cup, Would you declare FIFA non-compliant, and what could that mean? First question. Second question...
Let's let him take the first question.
I was hoping for the second question so I could think about the answer to the first question.
Not better, I'm afraid.
Well, the answer is I don't know. We are in touch with FIFA as we speak. FIFA are aware of the situation. People are aware that as code signatories there will be a new compliance procedure in place. I think as I said, I think it's unlikely that even going through that process it would be completed in time to do anything about a Russian team before the World Cup. However, if this is a public debate, there is a thing called the Court of Public Opinion, and the more debate there is about this, I'm quite certain that the FIFA officials will look at it.
Okay, so it's a thing of timing. But a second question was, you used the term institutionalized manipulation. Could you lead us a little bit through the linguistics with that? Because all the IOC members, most sports officials, they are using this term, institutionalized manipulation, as opposite to state-run, state-organized doping. So what's the difference?
The difference is that McLaren in his first report actually checked the report. He used the phrase state-directed, but it was picked up by the media as state-sponsored in his first report. And in his second report, he used the phrase institutionalized manipulation. And that's why my independent compliance review committee, when it says to Russia, please accept the report, they want it accepted in the words that McLaren has used. That's why we do it. Now, there are different definitions. I think in different countries, state-sponsored would mean something, whereas institutionalized manipulation would mean something less. I think perhaps one of the problems we have in Russia is that they are trying to say that both things say the same thing.
Okay, both say the same thing. That's nice because
that might be their definition. It's not necessarily mine.
It looks a little bit like whitewashing the problem, you know, because institutionalized is the Russian vocabulary, but if the KGB, if the Ministry of Sports are organizing, then of course it's a state-run system somehow. And I asked myself, that's why I asked you the question, if this is a means for the IOC to go lightly on the Russians.
Okay, it's not the IOC who's doing this, it's the World Anti-Doping Agency. We will declare eventually RUSADA to be compliant, and that's where these two conditions come into play. And I have spent hours and hours and hours trying to agree wording with my Russian colleagues, which correctly reflects, in our view, in the view of a compliance review committee, what that wording should be. And as yet, we're not quite there.
In the Mail on Sunday report out today, there's new information that speaks directly to the vocabulary question of state-directed, state-sponsored, institutionalized. So I'd encourage everyone to take a look at that. We have 1 minute left. Who could get a question in? The most enthusiastic person over here can have the last question. The time's ticking. Can we get the microphone over there? Run, run, run.
Thank you. Nikki Dryden. Do you believe that you can uphold your obligations as both an IOC member and the president of WADA when the last few years has proven that those two entities have differing interests?
Who are you, can I ask?
Nikki Dryden.
Yeah. The answer is yes. The system has been, ever since WADA started, that the presidents of WADA moved from sport to governments and back to sport, and that's where I am. The governance group that is working is looking at the word independence as far as that's concerned in the future. And I think the criteria that is likely to emerge will be something along the lines of having no other commitment in sport. I was Vice President of the IOC, so therefore I was a senior member. I am no longer a Vice President, and I have come under some severe criticism from my own organisation as the IOC, and I regard myself as being, from WADA point of view, completely independent and free to take what I think are the correct decisions. But thank you for the question.
Let's thank Craig Reedie for taking our questions and getting us off to a good start. 25-minute break. Thank you.